Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here, and I'd like to congratulate the conference organizers on your theme, the global classroom. I think your timing is most opportune. In the introductions, it was mentioned I've visited Penang 4 times, and I love Penang. But the reason I've visited on each occasion is to deal with open education. And this, in many respects, is a testament to the burgeoning leadership that Malaysia is showing in moving the open education agenda forward. And it's interesting that on each occasion my visit has been to Penang. So before commencing, I do want to acknowledge and congratulate Universiti Sains Malaysia on the launch of your OER initiative. And you'll see that OER is proudly displayed on the landing page of the portal of CAPE. I also want to acknowledge that the home of OER Asia is also here in Penang, headquartered here at your sister institution, the Open University of Wawazan Open University. Before we begin, 2 quick questions. Or 2 quick thoughts. It's extremely dangerous to predict the future. But as Peter Drucker has pointed out to us, we can, in fact, by analyzing the data and looking at the trends, see the future that has already happened. Another thought about the future. It's extremely hard to research the future because we don't have data about the future. But the fact that we don't have data about the future is not a reason to say tomorrow is not going to happen. It's at this point that I usually issue my health warning. And that is, if you do suffer from hypertension, you best listen to me under parental guidance. The reason being is I am a free software user, and if during the course of this presentation I don't get to mention your favorite proprietary software tool, take a deep breath and relax, you'll be fine. The deal is, if you come to me and say, Wayne, that is an incredibly cool piece of software you are using, can you give me a copy? I don't want to be faced with the ethical dilemma of refusing to help a friend. And so I've chosen to be a free software user so that I can share software freely with all educators around the world. A little bit about the OER Foundation. We are a charitable organization that provides leadership, international networking, and support to education institutions around the world to achieve their strategic objectives using open education approaches. We also host the UNESCO Commonwealth of Learning and CDAE chair in OER. We host 3 flagship projects. 1, Wiki Educator, which today is a collaboration of more than 70,000 educators working at the heart of the education endeavor, and that is to share knowledge freely. We also host Creative Commons Aotearoa New Zealand, which is the national affiliate of Creative Commons in New Zealand. But our major initiative is the OER Universitas. This is a collaboration of like-minded institutions from 6 regions of the world who are working together to provide more affordable access to credible credentials using OER. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the institutions who are leading the future of open education towards more affordable education with pathways to achieve formal academic recognition. What I do want to point out, which is quite unique with our partnership, are the leading open distance learning institutions around the world who are part of our network. The University of South Africa, which is Africa's largest university, and in fact the world's first single-mode distance teaching university of the world. Athabasca University, which is Canada's e-learning university. The Open University, who many of you will know, is really the pioneer of the open education model around the world. And more locally, the University of Southern Queensland, who you would also be quite familiar with, who teach extensively through open distance learning approaches. So, question, will there be life after school? And what I'm referring here is the transition from agrarian society to industrial society to the knowledge society. And if we think back historically, the origins of school as we know it as organized schooling is a condition of the industrialization of society. Before the industrialization of society, we did not have school in organized systems the way that we know it today. So I suppose that is a plausible question. Will we have life after school? How are things going to change? I would be remiss if I didn't say anything about MOOCs, but MOOCs are so passé, so 2012. But what I do want to point out is if you go and look closely at the terms of reference of Coursera, you'll find the following. You may not take any online course offered by Coursera or use any statement of accomplishment as part of any tuition-based or for credit certification or program. Coursera claims ownership of economic rights of an individual student's learning, and I, as an educator, have a fundamental problem with that approach. We all know that it's extremely difficult to mix oil and water. But the chemists will tell me that you can do this by creating an emulsion. And I'm not a chemist. I enjoy a bit of cooking. And in the cooking world, we can make a sauce called a hollandaise sauce, which is essentially mixing oil and water together. But we all know it's a delicate balance. If you add the oil too quickly, the sauce is not going to hold. And if the temperature gets too hot, the sauce is going to split. And so we've got a number of very difficult tensions in open education. How do we blend education for all with a for-profit venture capital model? Is that appropriate? How do we blend the mass standardization model with a future that should be focused on mass customization? How do we mix the challenge of using proprietary closed content with open education? And these are some of the challenges that we are thinking about within the OERu. We can look at the history of innovation, and if I'm sure quite a number of you are of my ilk in terms of years, you will remember Kodachrome, which was in fact the world's largest market supplier of color film. In 2009, Kodachrome shut down their factory. But the interesting observation, of course, is that the fundamentals of photography haven't changed. It's just the way we do it that has. But the example I enjoy most is the example of the ice harvesting industry. In the late 1800s, in the Northern Lakes region in the USA, they would go and harvest big blocks of ice for cooling, which would be exported around the world. And in those years, it was one of the largest earners of gross domestic product in the United States of America, the export of ice. And we know the history, the invention of compressor-driven refrigeration, and things changed. But the interesting observation here is the rhetoric that takes place around the time of fundamental change. There were those arguing, and this is published, that the quality of authentic ice was superior to the quality of artificial ice. And so very often at times of change, we find this rhetoric, the so-called red herrings. And when we think about open education, the two most significant red herrings we find are the sky is going to fall down if our universities open up their teaching materials. And the other rhetoric, of course, is OER represents poor quality. None of which are true. I put it to you, if you as educators are developing poor quality materials, who are we going to blame? The point is, as educators, we can discern between high quality and low quality. You will also be familiar with the tragedy of the commons from medieval Europe, where they would use common grazing grounds for the animals, and which were overgrazed. And my good friend, Professor Rory McGreal, who's the UNESCO chair at Athabasca University in OER, alerted me to this protest poem, published round about the time of the tragedy of the commons. They hang the man and flog the woman who steals the goose from off the common, but leave the greater villain loose who steals the common from off the goose. And I think sometimes in higher education we are guilty of stealing the common from the goose. And if we at the OER Foundation have any insight to the future of open education, it's only because we stand on the shoulders of giants. And that is a line I stole from a speech given by Eben Moglen in 2001, who stole that line from Isaac Newton, who stole that line from Louis Stieglitz, who stole that line from Bernard Schaufels. And we know this because of an anonymous note that was published in the British Journal. I want to reflect for just a moment on the absurdity of copyright in higher education. Those of you that are sociologists and anthropologists might be aware of this in the region. That's a piece of lapita pottery from the seafaring nations around the South Pacific. That pottery is carbon dated to 3,500 years old. Now, in one of the OERu courses, we were developing a course on regional relations in Asia and the Pacific, and one of the stimulus examples was about the Lapita people and Lapita pottery. The only licensed image, I couldn't find any open licensed images of Lapita pottery. And I found one image, this one here, which was licensed, all rights reserved, to a leading research university in New Zealand. Now the challenge here is there is no way that pottery could ever fall under copyright, because it was produced 2,500 years before copyright came into existence. And even if it was under, the copyright would have expired. But the problem is the copyright of photographs belongs to the photographer or the institution that took the photograph. And so I wrote to this research university who are supposed to be sharing knowledge, and I said, could you please relicense that image under an open license? The reply I got was a purchase form. We will give you a one-instance license if you pay us $150 US. I said, no, I appreciate that your university owns a copyright. Would you mind if I send one of my photographers from the free culture to come and take a photo of that artifact in your collection so that we could license this openly? I never got a response. The story has a happy ending. One of our partners, the University of the South Pacific, it so happened that Professor Patrick Dunn, who at the time was the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, had in fact directed one of the most significant findings and digs of Lapita pottery. I wrote to Patrick, I said, Patrick, would you be prepared to share this on an open license? He said, sure, I'm a researcher. My job is to share knowledge. And so we have a wonderful collection of openly licensed images. Before the seminar, I put out an optional survey to members attending this workshop to find out what some Malaysian educators think about the concept of sharing knowledge. And I've compared this with an international data set we've got. We've got a data set from thousands of educators from about 120 different countries. And so here are the findings from the survey that you'd completed. Did you know about Creative Commons before the time? Roughly the same as the international data we have. Did you know about the concept of OER? So again, it shows Malaysia's leadership here. Did you know about Creative Commons licenses? Slightly less than the international average. But that's not a problem, we can address that. Have you used Creative Commons licensed content before? Here the data gets interesting. Compared with international data, fewer educators in Malaysia have actually used Creative Commons content before. Have you applied a Creative Commons license to anything that you produced before? Only 7% of the respondents had indicated. Again, this is not a problem because we can address this. How would you rate your knowledge of Creative Commons licenses? Pretty much around the same at the beginner level. And as I said, we can address this problem through the OER Foundation, the UNESCO Commonwealth of Learning Chair Initiative. We provide free courses to any educator on the planet who wants to learn more about open education and Creative Commons licenses. And so the next time we run one of these open online workshops, I will let colleagues and friends here in Malaysia know, and you're most welcome. Every educator in Malaysia is free to come and join any one of these workshops. This is our mandate, is to build capability in these areas. We asked the question, should content funded by taxpayer dollars be released openly for everybody to use? Is it fair and reasonable for educators to have unrestricted permissions to copy materials for teaching purposes? And by far the overwhelming majority of educators believe that it is fair and reasonable to have these rights to support our mission of sharing knowledge. About the red herrings. Reasons why you don't participate in OER. Are you reluctant to share teaching materials because you don't have the time or the incentives, or you're concerned about the quality? The majority of educators disagree with those statements. So this is interesting. As educators, we want this to happen. Will education institutions lose their competitive advantage if they open up their education materials openly? Again, the majority of educators here in Malaysia disagree with that statement. So the point I'm making is, from a perspective of educators, we want this to happen. We want this to happen. It's our role as educators. And Larry has already referred to this. The major challenge we are facing, based on research from UNESCO and the Commonwealth of Learning, is over the next 25 years or so, we have to provide for an additional 100 million places in education worldwide. And we know the conventional model is not going to deliver on this. As Larry had pointed out, we'll have to build 4 universities the size of USM every week for the next 25 years in order to meet that target. So what are we doing? At the OER Foundation, we have launched the OERu. And the concept is a simple one. We can build and reuse courses that are based entirely on OER. But designing smart systems and using technologies, we can cater for a system of academic volunteers. Leading up to our partner institutions providing formal assessment services, and in our case that will be on a cost recovery basis, leading to credible credentials, aimed at serving those learners who are excluded from the privilege of a tertiary education. I must stress that the work that we're doing is first and foremost a charitable exercise. Our partner institutions are collaborating out of an agenda of social justice and inclusion to widen access to those learners who are excluded from tertiary education. I should also point out that the OERu collaboration is distinctively open. Everything we do, all our planning, all our strategic development, our open course development, is all done openly and transparently in WikiEducator. We are taking open teaching forward as a strategic initiative. So what about the business of open? How much is it going to cost? How much are we going to save? Who's going to pay for this? Well, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out the sustainability of this model. The marginal cost of replicating digital knowledge is near zero. And if 2 or more institutions collaborate together on developing and assembling high-quality courses from OER, it's cheaper than doing it alone. Based on our data, the question used to be, how do we achieve sustainable OER projects? The question today is, how will your institutions remain sustainable without OER? The proof is in the pudding. Our numbers, the average four-year degree in the United States of America costs just under, roughly about $26,000 for a four-year degree. We have calculated on a cost recovery basis that we are able to do this through real data in terms of what partner institutions have charged for assessment services for as little as or a saving of as much as 75% on the total cost of tuition without government grant to support this. In New Zealand, for example, we are lobbying with government and discussing with government the opportunities for government to actually sponsor an assessment-only model. And in theory, we could get to a position where we could provide free education, free tertiary education for a number of New Zealanders. You won't be able to see the data of this graph, but we've run surveys amongst our membership asking the institutions, why did you join this OERu collaboration? In order of priority, the top reason is to be part of an international network. The second reason is our philanthropic mission to widen access to education. But the third one is the most interesting one, is to explore new business opportunities that may arise from the open education model. Another way of looking at the OERu, under a traditional university package, the content services, interaction services, credentialing services, technology support services, assessment services are sold to the learner as a single package. What we are doing with the OERu model is disaggregating the core services. We can provide content services and interaction services at no cost using OER. Support services and technology services we can provide to the learner at no cost using a collaborative consortium model where our members pay a nominal membership fee that cover the costs of running the central infrastructure to do this. Assessment services and credentialing services are provided by our partner institutions on a cost recovery basis. Our partners retain decision-making autonomy in terms of how this functions within their systems. In other words, we do not require changes in policy at the institution in order for the system to work. The concept of free-range learning is in fact doable. With thanks to the Open Education Consortium, we have 30,000 modules which we can reassemble for providing credit services to any learner around the world. There are literally, when I last looked, over 10,000 open access journals. In fact, in the research world, we have reached the tipping point. There are more journals available under open access than there are under closed subscription journals. And of course, our knowledge around open education practices is improving. One of the things that we do in the OERu is use what we call micro open online courses, small m. But the small m here doesn't refer to size. It refers to a subcomponent of a degree course. Because think about it, we are working globally and we're working internationally. We've got to think about how do you manage course articulation and accreditation across a global network where the size of courses differs. So for example, in North America, a typical 3-credit course is roughly about 120 notional hours of learning, compared with 150 notional hours of learning in New Zealand, compared with 160 notional hours in Australia. So we've got to have building blocks in which we can put together courses in smaller units, and using a micro format enables us to do that. A quick word about the technologies we use. We do not use a learning management system. And the reason we don't use a learning management system has got nothing to do with some philosophical stance of new pedagogy. The reason we don't use learning management systems is very, very practical. Our first challenge is one of scalability. If the OERu is going to be serving millions of learners in the future, if we have a large course and somebody a facilitator, let's say, were to organize a web conference, and that facilitator said, go and click on my discussion point on Tuesday afternoon that I posted, and you have thousands of learners clicking simultaneously on that discussion forum, the likelihood of crashing your learning management system is quite high. So one of the things we've got to think about is how do we scale? And how we scale is to distribute the computing power across the web. That's one practical reason. The other practical reason is within our network, we have any of 6 or more different learning management systems in our network. Some campuses are Moodle campuses, others are Blackboard, others are Desire to Learn, others are Sakai campuses. We have institutions that have their own home-built systems. And one of the advantages of the OERu is the ability to be able to reuse a course for your local full-fee paying students without spending a cent on development cost. So you have to have a mechanism for being able to integrate course content into your local learning management system. And despite what everybody says about IMS content packages and SCORM and interoperability, I've spent a number of years developing open source technologies in that area. I'm sad to say that I've yet to see an IMS content cartridge import in a local learning management system that looks as good as the native content that was developed in the system. Moreover, it's extremely hard to export from your learning management system into these formats. So if you wanted to share content across, 35 different institutions, you've got to have ways of doing that. And so the way that we address this problem is really simple. Our interoperability standard is HTML. We develop all our materials for the web, and it's a simple process to be able to integrate that into a learning management system, because you must remember in OER, we don't have to hide that content behind password, right? It can be open, so we don't have a problem there. The other challenge is if we are collaborating as authors together. Let's say I'm collaborating with you at USM, with folk at University of Southern Queensland and Thomson Rivers University in Canada, developing the same course materials. If we're using a learning management system, and I come in and I make a change in that course, the other members of the team are not going to know what that change is easily. So if we are working collaboratively, we need a tool that keeps a very detailed edit history, right? And the tool that we use for this purpose is a simple technology called a wiki, which keeps a very detailed history of every single edit that is ever made. There are far more sophisticated technologies for version control that are used in the open source software world. But the problem is the average educator is not going to know how to use Gitorius, for example, the technologies we use for open source development. What we also do, and this is a very significant MOOC-like feature that runs in many of the MOOCs, is how we distribute the interactions across a variety of technologies around the world. I mean, our learners, they microblog on Twitter, our WeNotes tool that we've got, they post their learning evidence on blogs, on discussion forums, say, for example, Google Plus or wherever. The interactions are taking place around the world. What we have is a technology which actually aggregates all those interactions into a historical timeline, so that we have got a feed, and there is an example of a feed that we're pulling from a variety of technologies that are distributed across the web. So that's interesting. But why this is so important, and we'll come to this in a moment, is the concept of what we call parallel mode delivery. That is where you use OERu course materials for your local full-fee, full-paying students that you integrate and provide tutorial support to your own students. Learning in parallel with free learners. The free learners don't get tutorial support from the professors, and the reason is we can't afford it. It's not because we don't want to give tutorial support, but we just can't do it. We haven't got a mechanism to fund that. But we design our courses to integrate high levels of peer learning support. And there's some very interesting data that is emerging when you start teaching this way. And I'll reflect on an example. In 2013, we ran an experiment with the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, teaching one of these micro-open online courses to their full-fee registered students, right, who were getting tutorial support from the tutors in parallel with free learners that were doing one of these OERu courses, right? But it was an interesting experiment because when we first designed the technologies to support this, we needed to test how to integrate the sort of free learner interactions with interactions of the students in the registered learning management system. Now you'll appreciate the problem. I would imagine that at your university, you would not be able to provide access to your learning management system to students who are not registered with your institution. And nor should you. I'm not suggesting that. But what I'm saying is there's a practical challenge of being able to get free learners to see what some of the full fee students are saying, right? Without giving them access to tutorial support, because your students are paying for that, right? So the way that we do this is we register, because we're a trusted partner, we register a student robot that is effectively a student on the course. And in the learning management system, we designate a public forum in the learning management system, in addition to all the other discussions and forums that are in the learning management system. And we tell the learners, if you want to interact with the free learners, you want to have a conversation with them, post it in the public forum. They know in advance, they're posting to a public forum, they know in advance that the copyright of what they're posting must carry an open license. So we've got permissions to be able to replicate it. And what we do is we make a mirror image of those discussions on our servers so that the free learners can see what is happening. And so you may be asking, so what is the advantage of students who are paying full fee? The advantage for those learners, and this is something which institutions can market, is the ability to generate an intercultural, international learning experience for your local learners. We typically attract learners from 50 to 100 plus countries when we run these open courses. They are amazing experiences. So a little bit about the technology. So I said we first had to test the technology, and so we tested it just with free learners before we ran it with the course with registered students. And then we ran it with registered students. What that enabled us to do was to compare what happens with the data when you run these courses in parallel with full courses with registered students. That first graph is a summary of all the pages on the course with the different sessions. The first session is not an important session. That was the session where learners were told, this is how you set up the technology. But what is interesting, across all learners, and in this particular example, 60% of the learners were free learners against 40% being full fee registered students. We didn't see the attrition of learners that we see with the open MOOCs. We also noted an increase of 62 to 200% better interaction on all forms of interaction in this course. Now this is still early days, it's one course example, I'm not sure we can generalize statistically from this data, but it at least alludes to a hypothesis that the quality of discourse that takes place between students studying for real credit keeps free learners engaged. It's very interesting. So the big challenge for us at the OERu as we roll out this long-term strategic vision is how do we close the gap between the future value that the OERu network provides and the immediate tangible benefits our partners get from being part of this network here and now. That is the strategic challenge. And the way that we are doing it is through a number of configurations. First scenario is where we reuse a course that was developed by another partner, integrated locally for our own full fee paying students for credit. This is particularly useful for low enrollment courses. So we're focusing on massification, but think about it. It's not cost effective to develop independent study materials for low enrollment courses. So this is a practical way in which institutions can expand and diversify their curriculum cost effectively. We have an example where courses developed by the University of Canterbury have been reapproved for teaching at Otago Polytechnic, which is typically a low enrollment course. We didn't spend any money on the course development, but we're all benefiting. A win-win scenario. The other example I've already explained is this parallel mode delivery, where you have a free open online course running through the OERu with these learners distributed all around the world who are studying with full-time students at your institution. The value, of course, is providing an international, intercultural learning experience. We have practical examples of actually running these courses within the network. But the real exciting one, which I want to get to, is this parallel mode for all our partner institutions. Can you imagine the power of running one micro-open online course in parallel with learners studying for full credit at 3, 4, 30 partners at the same time? That is exciting. That adds value to local institutions getting engaged in the open education model. I want to start wrapping up so we can maybe have time for 1 or 2 questions. The OERu doesn't require new money. The recurrent costs of this model are guaranteed, they're recouped. The OERu is low cost, low risk, but high impact innovation. One of the thought leaders, those of you working in open distance learning may well know Jim Taylor from the University of Southern Queensland. He points out this is not theoretical speculation. It's entirely viable. We are doing it. I want to wrap up by paraphrasing Edmund Burke. All that is necessary for closed and unsustainable education systems to triumph is for good organizations like ourselves to do nothing. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Wayne. We leave the questions to the afternoon session, okay, during the forum panel session. Okay.